In the Pokemon TCG, some cards have an obvious effect with no mystery surrounding their function. These are cards that do very specific things, and by reading the card you're instantly aware of everything it can do. A card like Nest Ball simply searches your deck for a basic Pokemon and puts it onto your bench, with very little confusion surrounding it. But some cards in Pokemon TCG history have text that can read in about 20 different ways depending on your perspective. Some of these effects are super broad, and some are so complicated when reading them that it makes the text feel like you're a 5-year-old reading Shakespeare. But today, I'm here to clear the air on some of the Pokemon TCG's most confusing cards and game mechanics. So, let's get straight into it. Subscribe if you enjoy. As always, it's the best way to support the channel. Let's go. The first card I'm going to cover in today's video is Pokemon Ranger from X and Y Steam Siege in 2016. This supporter card reads that it removes all effects of attacks on each player and their Pokemon. This is one of those super broad cards that upon first read appears to do nothing specific, and in reality it really doesn't do anything specific. First, if you are currently under an item lock that was caused by an attack from, say, Bidoof, then Pokemon Ranger being played ends the item lock instantly. This, however, does not remove the effect of abilities that lock you out of items like Vileplume's Irritating Pollen, since Ranger says it only removes effects of attacks, while Irritating Pollen is an ability. A weird ruling is that if your Pokemon is affected by a status condition, Pokemon Ranger will not heal the status condition even if an attack was the cause of it. This is because once the status condition is inflicted, the fact that an attack caused it has nothing to do with the fact that the Pokemon is now asleep or paralyzed, for example. For all the game knows, anything could have caused the status condition, but Pokemon Ranger doesn't remove status conditions in its effect explicitly, so it won't do that here. Additionally, Ranger can't change effects placed on status conditions directly. An example would be that Poison now does additional damage, or that Sleep now requires an additional coin flip. This is simply explained by TPCI with the fact that Pokemon Ranger can't interact with status conditions. Another odd set of rulings have to do with the effects of attacks that take place over multiple turns. For example, if your Mewtwo uses the barrier attack that makes it immune to all damage, but fails if used successively, and then that Mewtwo lives until your next turn without switching out, you can't then play Pokemon Ranger to reset the drawback of Barrier. To quote the official ruling, Barrier does not place an effect to prevent its use on the next turn, unlike attacks like Volcanic Heat, which prevents an attack on the next turn. Instead, the attack does a game state check to see if it was used last turn. Since there is no effect to clear, Pokemon Ranger won't allow you to use Barrier 2 turns in a row. Another multiple turn attack is that of Medicham V's Yoga Loop, which allows the user to take an additional turn if the attack knocked out a Pokemon, but it can't be used twice in a row. For the same reason as attacks like Barrier, since the clause that it can't be used again is a game state check, Pokemon Ranger can't reset it, meaning you can't Yoga Loop again on your extra turn from a previous Yoga Loop, even if you play Ranger. Another example is that if you use an ability with a clause that it can only be used once per turn, like Flip the Script, then play Pokemon Ranger, you can't then use that ability again, since that clause is an effect of an ability and not an attack. This would also count as a game state check. So you can't, for example, Dede change with the Dene GX, use Ranger, and then Dede change again that same turn. Ranger will also remove effects on a Pokemon like that they can't retreat, or that their attacks or retreat costs are increased. Additionally, Pokemon Ranger will remove the effects of attacks like Altered Creation GX from ADP, since it's an effect on the opponent and that opponent's Pokemon that was caused by an attack. So in expanded format, ADP can be fully countered by one use of Pokemon Ranger. It also removes effects from attacks that make the user immune to damage from attacks, such as Noivern EX's Covert Flight. If Noivern uses Covert Flight and the opponent on their next turn plays Pokemon Ranger, Noivern can now be damaged by basic Pokemon, since the effect of Covert Flight is not a game state check and is caused by that attack. Lastly, you can't play Pokemon Ranger if it will do nothing, since to quote the ruling, you cannot play a trainer card for no net effect. This is the same reason you can't use a card draw ability like the Dunsparce's ability Runaway Draw when you have 0 cards left in your deck. Another confusing card with similar text to Pokemon Ranger is Channeler from Unified Minds. Channeler looks just like Pokemon Ranger at first glance, except that it removes all effects of attacks on you in each of your Pokemon. This means that unlike Pokemon Ranger, it doesn't remove effects on your opponent's Pokemon or on your opponent. This means that if you play Channeler after the opponent uses Altered Creation GX from ADP, then the Altered Creation effect will not be removed, since that isn't an effect on you or any of your Pokemon. But hilariously, if the ADP player used Altered Creation GX and then used Channeler after, they would in fact remove their own Altered Creation effect, since it was an effect on them and their Pokemon. Channeler is similar to Pokemon Ranger in that it removes effects like attack-based item lock and retreat lock, as well as allowing your Pokemon to attack again even if the attack was used on their last turn, and has a clause that says it can't be used again. So Channeler rules the exact same way as Pokemon Ranger does, except when accounting for the opponent's Pokemon and effects of attacks affecting the opponent directly. So in that Noivern example, Channeler wouldn't allow you to break the wall since the effect is on Noivern and not you or any of your Pokemon. These were some very broad reading cards I wanted to cover in today's video since they're so misunderstood, even by me at one point, but there are some other weird rulings TPCI has enforced. Did you know that Pokemon lowercase EX from the Scarlet and Violet era are officially one and the same as the Pokemon EX from the Ruby and Sapphire era? Pokemon themselves confirmed that a card interacting with a lowercase Pokemon EX like Cyrano, for example, would work the same for today's Pokemon EX as it would for Pokemon EX from the mid-2000s. So for example, you can only play 4 in any combination of Gardevoir EX from Scarlet Violet base set and the Gardevoir EX from Sandstorm. They're categorically identical. I just found this pretty cool, even though these sets of cards will never interact with one another outside of unofficial formats like Unlimited, where any card ever made is legal. Froslass from Twilight Masquerade is a staple of competitive play in the Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX archetype, where it has top cut numerous major events since Grimmsnarl was released. But this card has some strange interactions that I'm sure some of you didn't realize. Froslass's Freezing Shroud ability places 1 damage counter on each Pokemon in play that has an ability in between turns. Well, what if the Pokemon has an ability printed on the card itself, but that ability is currently disabled by a card like Klefki, which disables basic Pokemon's abilities? Well, then Froslass won't tick on that Pokemon since it technically doesn't have an ability anymore, despite the card itself having an ability on it. Also, a well-known one is that if a Pokemon is knocked out by Freezing Shroud in between turns, then it doesn't activate abilities like Phesandipity's Flip the Script that require a Pokemon to be knocked out during the opponent's last turn. This is because the Pokemon was technically not knocked out during the opponent's turn, but rather in between turns during Pokemon checkup. So Flip the Script can't be activated if a Pokemon was knocked out by Freezing Shroud. This is part of the reason Grimmsnarl almost never plays Pheasantipity itself, and why Grimm is so strong in general since it can ignore Pheasantipity with smart damage placement and timing. An example that you can actually test for yourself right now has to do with abilities on Pokemon that get knocked out. The main cards affected by this are bench barrier Pokemon like Shaman from Destined Rivals and Manaphy from Astral Radiance, as well as Mega Gengar EX from Phantasmal Flames. The official ruling is that if a Pokemon like Radiant Greninja uses a bench snipe attack, knocks out a Manaphy in the active spot, and hits a Pokemon on the bench, Manaphy will still protect the second instance of damage from going through. So you can't use Boss on Shaman and then use Kyurem's Trifrost attack to knock out Shaman and 2 of their bench Pokemon that don't have a rule box. The bench protection remains on those Pokemon even as Shaman is getting knocked out at the same time. A similar ruling has to do with Mega Gengar EX's ability. To keep this one brief, if you only have 1 Mega Gengar EX in play and it gets knocked out by a Pokemon EX, your opponent still only gets 2 prize cards instead of 3 for that knockout, since the ability protects itself and then it gets knocked out after that. Similarly, if the opponent knocks out a lone Mega Gengar EX and a bench Dark Pokemon at the same time, then Mega Gengar's ability will still work on the Pokemon on the bench, the same way Shaman and Manaphy still protect your bench. This one is kinda weird, but you can also just test it yourself on TCG Live right now, so it isn't that big of a surprise to anyone who has used these cards or played against them a lot. A ruling that has confused even top pro players is the ruling on Mega Signal.
Well, yeah, I just assumed that's how it worked.
Okay. I'm going to the compendium.
But that does make sense.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't change what you want to do. You have to still... Okay.
Yeah, now I'm curious, actually.
I'm pretty sure. That's what I would think.
Find out. I didn't realize they are called the Mega Evolution form. Well, it's, the Mega Evolution form map, so. Yeah, they're all just called Mega Evolution Pokemon.
What is the wording of Mega Signal? Because Mega Signal, you can just search for a Mega Pokemon, right?
Oh, true, that would probably tell us. I'm not sure what Mega Signal says. But I know Mega Signal can get...
Kangaskhan.
Yeah.
Search your deck for a Mega Evolution Pokemon EX reveal and put it in your hand.
Yeah, I guess they're all Mega Evolution Pokemon. Yeah, I thought Wallace Compassion was 4 evolved...
Looks like you're the one who needs to read.
The Mega Signal item card for Mega Evolution reads that it searches your deck for a Mega Evolution Pokemon EX and puts it into your hand. What's confusing about this card is that it says Mega Evolution Pokemon EX on it, which gives some people the impression that you can't get a basic Mega Pokemon EX with Mega Signal. But you can. You are allowed to grab a Mega Evolution Pokemon EX even if it's a basic, since even basic Mega Pokemon have the rule box on them stating that they are a Mega Evolution Pokemon EX. This one is actually meta relevant since Mega Absol, Mega Kangaskhan EX decks play basic Mega Pokemon, and in some versions of the deck they would play Mega Signal to find Absol and Kangaskhan. Although this next one might seem a bit obvious at first, the wording on older cards has made it confusing for some people. Mega Evolution Pokemon lowercase EX and Mega Evolution Pokemon uppercase EX from the X and Y era are not the same and can't be interacted with each other the same. I'm sure nobody would object to this since the EX is a different capitalization for each. What is confusing is when you read cards from X and Y like Mega Turbo and Mega Catcher. Mega Turbo is an item that attaches a basic energy from the discard pile to one of your Mega Evolution Pokemon. Confusingly, it doesn't state that it attaches to a Mega Evolution Pokemon uppercase EX, but just Mega Evolution Pokemon. This then got people wondering whether you could use Mega Turbo to attach an energy to a Scarlet and Violet era Mega Pokemon. Mega Catcher is an item card from Phase Collide that functions like a free boss's orders on an item, but only for Mega Evolution Pokemon. But it is also not stating that it's uppercase EX Mega Pokemon it targets, which is super confusing. The official ruling is that cards like Mega Turbo and Mega Catcher cannot interact with Scarlet and Violet era Mega Pokemon, and vice versa. You can't Mega Turbo to a Mega Lucario lowercase EX, and you can't Mega Catcher a Mega Kangaskhan lowercase EX. TPCI rules that any card from the X and Y series that interacts with Mega Evolution Pokemon have zero interaction with Mega Evolution Pokemon from 2025 and 2026. This would have been a lot clearer if the X and Y trainer cards just had the uppercase EX printed on them, but I guess even Pokemon at the time might not have had any idea how popular Mega Evolutions would become, and figured they would never come back to the game the way they are right now. Another weird interaction has to do with Pokemon that have decreased attack cost, like specifically Drapion V, Cramorant, and Radiant Charizard. These Pokemon all have their attacks cost less energy when specific conditions are met thanks to their abilities. Drapion requires different battle style Pokemon to be in play to reduce its attack cost for each one. Radiant Charizard has its attacks reduced by 1 colorless for each prize the opponent takes, and Cramorant attacks for free if 4 cards are in your loss zone. All of these cards saw top tier tournament success and international championship victories, but because of the wording of their abilities, they actually had more function than initially thought possible, and it even forced Pokemon to change the way they printed cards in the future. Cramorant, Radiant Charizard, and Drapion have in their ability that their attacks cost less energy, but that doesn't just include their own attacks, but also attacks they now have access to. Specifically, these Pokemon are capable of using technical machines like Crisis Punch for free with their abilities. Crisis Punch is a tool card that gives the Pokemon it's attached to a 3 colorless energy attack that does 280 damage, but can only be used when the opponent has 1 prize card remaining. So if the opponent does have just 1 prize card remaining, then all you have to do is attach Crisis Punch to your Cramorant, and so long as you have 4 more cards in the loss zone, you can do 280 damage for free. This also works for the other technical machines, but specifically Crisis Punch creates some cool tech that even won an international championship in the seniors division in a Lost Box deck. With Crisis Punch, Cramorant became a great closer in a Goodra deck that lacked a one-hit KO potential in the late game. This actually forced Pokemon to make Blood Moon Ursaluna EX with a bit more caution. On Blood Moon's ability Season Skill, it functions the same as Radiant Charizard, but explicitly only reduces the cost of its Blood Moon attack and not any of the other attacks it has access to. I just thought this was pretty cool and something lots of newer players might not know about. The last mechanic I'll cover in today's video is damage counter placement. Some attacks like Radiant Greninja's Moonlight Shuriken do damage that can hit bench Pokemon. It will say something like that it does damage to a bench Pokemon or to one or more of the opponent's Pokemon. Where this gets a bit weird is attacks like Sablei's Lost Mine that place damage counters on bench Pokemon. Think back to Manaphy and Shaman and how they prevented bench damage. At first glance, these cards should block attacks like Phantom Dive, Spread Damage, and Lost Mine because they prevent all damage done to your benched Pokemon by attacks. But the damage counter placement of Lost Mine is actually considered an effect of an attack and not direct damage. This means that cards like Shaman and Manaphy cannot block this spread damage with their abilities, which was part of the reason Sableye was so frustrating and required Pokemon to print Jirachi as a tech for it. But cards like Mist Energy that block effects of attacks are able to block this damage. This one shouldn't be too surprising to people who actually play the game, but it is worth noting as it's just unnecessarily confusing, especially for newer players. But those were some of Pokemon's most confusing cards and game mechanics, and an explanation of them. I'm sure I didn't cover all of them, but if you're looking for answers, I'm sure you can research them yourself. I'll link in the description the website I used to find some of the rulings, since it has an entire catalog of official rulings for almost every card in the game. It also has general rulings on the game, some of which I listed here, called meta rulings, and rulings on general gameplay. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribing would be greatly appreciated if you enjoyed and or found this video helpful in any way. But as always, take care, have a good one, bye.